Good afternoon. I have never addressed such a large gathering in an afternoon. So, even if some of you have to take your siesta, it's okay with me. I have been a journalist in Delhi for almost over 2 decades. And I've spent most of my time looking at security, intelligence issues, as well as administrative decisions that have significant impact on the national life. While many of my stories have been published, most of my time I have spent the last 2 decades was in either searching a new job or being upset about what has not been published. So I've changed almost 8 jobs with the Hindu just for last 1 year. And I have been maintaining a folder in my email called the Morgue, which is a mortuary of the dead stories that I've been collecting. And now I am the custodian of a large number of dead stories, stories that are far more important to public life and in the concept of democracy and rise of India as a liberal democracy. They are much more than the stories that have appeared. And that's one of the reasons what forced me into doing this book, A Feast of Vultures. Sometime when I started this book in 2007-8 period, I told myself that I should document, write, without varnish and censorship, what I know about this country. And I had convinced myself that if no mainstream publisher wants to publish this book, I will self-publish it. But luckily I've had publishers auctioning the book and good response. And I think I would want to believe that in my own little way, I was trying to contribute to nurturing dissent and liberal discussion. And I think there is no better audience than you to talk about my book. And I think it's a great privilege because I am usually discussing my book with mainstream media or in television newsrooms where I think the dishonesty is very pervasive. And my book really sits very uneasy with in those premises because there are questions that they do not want to ask me. There are reviews that deliberately omit out many of the facts in my book. And there are journalists and analysts and critics who come up to me in private and praise my book, but in public do not want to be involved in discussing that. For such a reality which has been very in my face in the city of Delhi, I have been also getting to learn about India, that's different India. And it is delightful to hear people from Akka to Sophia speak about, and Wilson speak about and ultimately nurturing our belief in dissent. My book is premised on the belief that everything in this country is on sale, whether it's a birth certificate or a government. You just need to find the right middleman and pay the right fee, and you will definitely get what you deserve, and you could also get what you do not deserve. The book is about the story of people's searches for those right intermediaries. If it is a poor, they are searching for the intermediaries who will get them a bed in a government hospital, who would get them a dignified hearing in a police station. And if it is a rich billionaire, he is looking for the intermediary who will swing that $1 big billion-dollar deal for him that will change his fortunes further. The book opens in a village in Bihar called Hridayachak, where my friend Anwar has been trying to get a road to his village. And while he has been working in Delhi, he spends most of his time looking for the intermediaries to get a road to his village. And one day he realizes that actually there is a road on file that exists. And according to the files, the road actually has reached Hridayachak, but he doesn't know about the road. And that's where the book begins. And in that village, it's not just Anwar who is looking for the government and intermediaries. There is this Mahadalit. Wilson was talking about scavenging. But 80 Mahadalit families without any bathroom, so there is not even a question of human scavenging there. For them, the road that leads to the graveyard is their bathroom. And the Muslims whose who have the last journey on the road are very angry. So the Mahadalits tell me that, sir, ask the rich Hindu upper caste and the Muslims to give us another road. I said, why another road? They said, so that we can use it as bathroom. For them, the concept of bathroom ends with a road or an open space. And they're not alone. There are millions of people in this country, especially women and children, who are leaving their homes very early morning or in the evenings, looking for a safe place to relieve themselves. And in the process, many of them get assaulted, raped, humiliated, embarrassed. And those are stories that do not really find much space in the mainstream newspapers. So I think the cruelty of India is much hidden beyond what is being reported. And the reality that I figured out in the search for what India really is the fact that we are a large rural country with small urban pockets. 70% of us live in rural areas and just about 30% in urban centers. And my own finding, my own book argues that all of us, the urban dwellers, the ones who uses electricity without asking where it's produced and whose tears are there behind it, we are all the vultures who feast on the misery of those poor and the fortunes of this country. The book identifies several kinds of middlemen, and I think that's where academicians have not really paid much attention. I met this man called Abhay Narayan Rai on the outskirts of Bilaspur. Every morning, the poor villagers in his area come to him. Somebody wants to get to hospital, somebody needs an introduction to the police inspector, etc. And he does all those surveys, mostly free of cost and sometimes spending money from his pocket. So I asked him, but how do you manage your life? You have a lot of expenses. He says, there is a liquor contractor who has license to sell liquor 2-3 kilometers away, but I close my eyes when he sells it near my slum. So the liquor contractor subsidizes his life. People like him exist at the bottom of our country, where governance actually has completely disappeared from. Except maybe in some southern states, I think the top-down governance structure that we inherited from the British still exists without going down further. So the so-called Panchayati Raj and the decentralization have not really reached our poor. In the black hole that exists in those villages, there are these men like Rai, whom academic Aniruddha Krishna of Duke University calls Naya Nedas. They exist. They bring the government to them. And they bring people for the political parties. And they sometimes bring money also to the parties. And it's a phenomenon that is widespread and which has completely subverted the democracy at the bottom of the ladder. And these Nayadadas also end up being political leaders. One of them, met an old man in the village of Hridayachak and told him that, asked him to put a thumb impression on a piece of paper and gave him 100 rupees. I asked the old man, why did he give you 100 rupees? He said, oh, that's old age pension. I said, but old age pension in Bihar is supposed to be 300 rupees. He said, how does it matter? I never knew that the government existed. And now that somebody is giving me 100 rupees for my thumb impression, I'm happy with it. So that's a kind of corruption that remains. When the people are ignorant, the kind of corruption is far more pervasive than all that our documentations have done. The middlemen also exist at higher levels. There are this kind of mighty typists that I call. People who control the doors to the powerful people. People like R.K. Dhawan, who in the 50s became a typist to Indira Gandhi. His only qualification being his ability to type quickly on the keyboard, on typewriters, who went on to become the trusted aide of Indira Gandhi and is a permanent invitee to the Congress Working Committee. People like him, people like M.O. Matai with Nehru, people like Vincent George with Sonia Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. There are typists all over the country. And if you recall, there are typists, there are those PAs that we have often called up seeking an access to the power center so that we could present our case. Beyond the typists, there are the big middlemen who control, who can actually swing the big billion-dollar deal for an industrial house. And I came across this man whom I have been tracking for almost a decade now called Sudhir Chowdhury. One night, friends call him Bunny. He lives in London. He is quite influential in Indian politics, and you would know him. He is quite close to Kremlin in Russia, to Putin's people. His name figures in the Italian political scandals often. He is protected by the Israeli government using its military censorship from being adversely written about by the local media. Officially, he is the second largest donor to the Liberal Democratic Party of Britain. And in the US, he holds an academic research chair in the University of Columbia, named after him. And no Indian seems to know. And every time law begins to catch up with him, he disappears. And our CBI and other investigation agencies miserably fail to find any evidence. Evidence that I have been able to document in my own little search using openly available financial databases around the world. If Sudhir Chowdhury is a man who can swing your $1 billion deal, even then, to get the final approval, you need the men and women who are not professional intermediaries to tell you that yes, the Prime Minister or the concerned minister approves of the deal and the commission is being paid, so do that. And in that space exists a lot of these people like the Ranjan Bhattacharyas of the world, Robert Vadras, whether we don't know whether they're corrupt or not, but the fact is that these people have had astonishing business growth and they have played very crucial role in respective governments. You know, Ranjan Bhattacharya very interestingly gave an interview. He's Atal Bihari Vajpayee's foster son-in-law, in which he's asking the interviewer, who says money needs to be paid for meeting Vajpayee? Who says that I take money for meeting Vajpayee? And I thought it was an interesting way of documenting what the reality is. And are these the only vultures who feast on the misery of India? No, I think the people who feast on the misery of India is much more. There are these corporate classes that we have. People like Vijay Mallya, before he fled this country after the biggest bank loan default, he was a very respected member of the Rajya Sabha. And he was voted to Rajya Sabha by all the political parties. And once he was in parliament, none of the parties had any opposition, any protest when he sat in the consultative and standing committees of ministries in which he had business interests. When Kingfisher Airlines was being launched, he was in the consultative committee on civil aviation. And there are over 120 such MPs in this country. So obviously it's not surprising that Vijay Mallya was able to get away when legal proceedings were underway into the bank loan defaults by Kingfisher Airlines. Such impatient corporates buy their ways into the parliaments, while there is another kind of new generation businessmen that have risen up because of our tolerance towards the exploitation of the system. And there I put people like the Naveen Jindals of the world, Anil Agarwal of Vedanta. You know, there is a little government school in Bihar called, in Patna called Miller School. Those familiar with Patna would know it's a very legendary, historic primary school there, middle school in Patna. Anil Agarwal was a student of that school. Anil Agarwal is the owner of Vedanta, lives in London in one of the biggest mansions there. So one morning, the old principal in the school gets a phone call from one of the CEOs of Vedanta Group saying that, sir, you know, our founder is a student of your school. He wants to visit his alma mater. So next day, Anil Agarwal, his wife and son lands in a chartered aircraft in Patna, accompanied by very high resolution cinematic cameras and lights. They reach the school and he sips a cup of tea with the principal. He talks to the children and he distributes watches and bags to the children with Vedanta emblem on it. And then he tells his principal that, listen sir, this is my school, you know, I grew up here, I want to do something. Why don't you make a plan out for an auditorium, science labs, library, etc., and I will fund it for you. So the poor principal spent the next several months, probably with money from his pocket, getting architects and others to design a large complex. And the principal retired. I visited the school and I wrote a book and made some money out of the book. But Miller schools still do not have the promised auditoriums. The story is not very different when I went to Naya Raipur, you know, the new Raipur capital city that's coming up in Chhattisgarh. There outside an unfinished hospital, massive complex but unfinished, still under construction, is the story of Vedanta Group's promise to build the big cancer hospital when they took over Balco, our largest integrated aluminum plant in government sector, which is now run by Vedanta Group. The hospital is still incomplete. But outside the hospital, I met a security guard. He told me that, sir, you know, they wouldn't allow me, let me go inside the premise. The guard asked me, sir, I heard that my Malik is giving away all his money. I said, where? He said, I read in newspapers that Anil Agarwal has committed all his wealth to philanthropy. I mean, he doesn't know about philanthropy. In Hindi, he tells me. I said, so? He said, do you think that we will get some money from that? Will I benefit from it? I said, what's your salary? He said, some 6,000 rupees. I said, I pray, I hope you will also benefit from it. I'm sure the security guard is still hanging around in the hope that one day his rich honors, benevolence will reach him. But you go a little down into the mining areas, these same celebrated business magnates who are upheld as some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, who are celebrated on the world global stage, they are accused of intimidating and fooling our poor tribals and mining rapaciously. Is that the end of the kind of business class? No. Then there is the final chapter of my book where I do my final chapter from outside Antilia, which is the most expensive house built in our times by the richest Indian. When Mukesh Ambani decides to build his home, he could not find a piece of land that is not disputed, a piece of land that once was Waqf land, and a piece of land where once an orphanage stood and 60 poor children used to live. That's the story of the piece of land on which Antilia, which is built at over 10,000 crore rupees, is built. My book is an effort to document the deep immorality of our society, the deep immorality in which all of us are part of it, and we are also the vultures who feast on the reality of modern India. And because we are not able to address the reality in our television studios, we sit and speak the most dishonest language. We talk about threats in Balochistan and we disparagingly talk about the Kashmiris. We easily put people on brands without realizing the fact that all of us together, the business class, the political class, we are together assaulting the very concept of modern India. Before the 2014 Lok Sabha elections, there were not official, meaning private market estimates which appeared in mainstream media, which said that the last Lok Sabha election would witness over 20,000 crore rupees of expenditure. After the elections, when BJP filed its expense sheet, it declared 1,600 crore rupees of expense, and Congress something about 900 crore rupees. Nobody asked a question where the rest of the money went or who spent. But I found something very interesting tidbit which I've recorded in my book, which is that when the first administrative decision of Narendra Modi was to set up an SIT on black money, a special investigative team headed by 2 retired Supreme Court judges. And I claim that the largest black money case that ever came up before the SIT on black money was against the Adani Group, in whose aircraft Narendra Modi zipped across India campaigning for the elections. The SIT on black money ordered the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which submitted about 250 pages of a watertight documentation about how Adani Group took out over 5,000 crore rupees from India to Dubai and ultimately to Mauritius. The SIT on black money asked DRI to hand over that file, the papers, to Enforcement Directorate for it to investigate the case under both FEMA, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, as well as under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. The file is moved to Ahmedabad. The officer in Ahmedabad in charge of ED who was looking into the file is one morning raided by CBI, about a year and a half ago, and is transferred out. CBI has yet not filed a charge sheet against officer. His 2 superior officers based in Mumbai have both been forced out of the organization. And Rajan Katoch, who was the Enforcement Directorate Chief at this point of time, was also one morning unceremoniously removed from the post. My question is, and my concern is, that we are all masters of generalizations. And we are all mastering the art of jingoism in our television studios and newspapers. I think it's high time that we stop that and we got into specifics. Specifics about what happens if the land on which the Ambanis built the house was once a Waqf piece of land and once an orphanage. What happened to that case which is settling between the Maharashtra High Court and the Supreme Court? What happens to Adani black money case? What happens to Robert Wadra's unbelievable business skills in which he converts useless land into land worth crores of rupees in few months' time. What happens to this large black money operation called Indian politics? When will they come out of those black money hole? And until that, I think the idea of India would be continue to be assaulted by the very devious political class and the rapacious corporates and the dishonest individual like you and me. We would keep looking for ways to pay minimum tax like Donald Trump, and we would gloat in it. We would celebrate the corruption of each one of us until we are caught. And when we are caught, we disown him. And we will silently watch the investigation agencies and parliament being very smartly subverted. And we would continue to celebrate our GDP growth and figures when the fact is that we are a large rural country which houses the world's largest number of illiterates, its largest population of malnourished children, its largest number of people without toilets, its largest number of people doing human scavenging. You imagine we are actually worse than the sub-Saharan region, and we do not want to acknowledge. Until we acknowledge that reality, I think this country would remain a feast of vultures, and all of us would be part of that feast. Thank you.
Thank you, Josy Joseph. Would you like to take a few questions? Can we have the hall lights? Hall lights, please. I'd like to give the first chance to that corner at the back because I've had a lot of complaints from there that I'm not giving them a chance. So if anybody wants to ask a question from there, just stand up because I can't see you. Yeah? You? There's a lady there in black. You've asked once.
First of all, I'd like to say that I have huge appreciation for the kind of work that you do. Thank you very much. My question is, recently Panama Papers is all over the news, and we've heard about the consortium of investigative journalists. And what was the most startling thing was there was a consortium at all. So can you just give us a little peek on how adequate or inadequate you think collective action is amongst investigative journalists, especially on like big cases like tribal atrocities or corporate infiltration in India?
Look, the reality is that some of us are really among the extinct species because there are very few organizations in this country who spend money and resources on doing serious investigative journalism. Having said that, I must tell you that there is a large unreturned censorship that exists in our newsrooms. The censorships are imposed by the advertisers, by the vested interest of the owners who promote these media houses. These vested interests are also imposed on by the bullying governments of the day. So I think there is not much space for investigative journalism, and as I said in the beginning, more of my stories are there in the mortuary that have been published. But whenever you see a good story that comes out, I think there is a lot of collaborative work that goes behind it among journalists. And the fact is that one of my former editors told me when I told him that, look, I've got some contacts in one of those international consortiums which wanted to work with me. He said, do not touch it because we don't know what might come out. What if our own Maliks have some black money in there, So I think while it is, there is always collaborative in nature, but I think ultimately excellence is a very lonely pursuit. You have to, on your own, sit in front of the computer or in front of files, read through hundreds of pages of documents, do the mapping, do data mining, go and cultivate sources, and ensure that the sources are not misleading. What is going on in this country, in television and mostly in television, but to an extent in newspapers, as investigative journalism is all documents and information that are passed on by corporate lobbies and PR companies. So when an Anil Ambani and Mukesh Ambani fight, you will see large number of journalists suddenly turning into great investigative journalists with documents. So it's a very sad scenario in that sense, but I think things will change. Things have to change, not because of the outrage in the mainstream media or among the owners, but I think because of two factors. One is that we are a very young country, median age of 25. I think the youngsters would not allow this kind of treachery to go on. The second is the fact that we are an economy that's growing, and there are a lot of people, especially first generation entrepreneurs, who share a lot of these values, who are committing some money into these kind of activities.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is, the government releasing the information about the recent army surgical strikes, was it just a ploy to garner public support, particularly ahead of elections in, for example, Punjab and UP next year?
Yeah, you know, the reality is that we have become a large propagandist country, and BJP is not an exception. All of them, every party is just plain propaganda. I think they think that people are very easy to be fooled, and I think it's a fooling game that's going on. I've been covering defense since the late 90s, and I've reported about and written about a large number of cross-border raids that have happened over the years, especially after the Kargil war and all that. So it's nothing new. And this claim of owning up what is your most potent ability, special forces, which is supposed to be done quietly, I mean, while it, at one level it might make sense to be sending a signal to somebody like an irrational state like Pakistan about your willpower to hit back, but at the same time, I don't know whether it's the right military strategy to be announcing special forces raids and all that. Many of those claims that are involved in last week's briefings are all wrong. They have said that they've killed up to 40 terrorists. I don't think so. To the best of my knowledge, the casualties are very low. And I don't think it was so large scale as they're claiming. But didn't Barack Obama very courageously announce the killing of bin Laden? So, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, the traditional sense of statehood is that intelligence, special forces, commando capabilities, etc. are very secretive in nature. But I think in a new boisterous world, especially in a country like ours, propaganda is now the key tool of governance. And as Wilson said about Swachh Bharat or anything else, there is more money being spent in advertisements and campaigns than in doing real work. So I am confused, but I'm appalled by the kind of aggressive propaganda, and more disconcertingly, I'm really worried about the way our media is gulping it all down. Majority of the media, and are acting merely as not only propaganda tools, but also as warmongers. And I think having covered little amount of military, I think it's a very, very, very dangerous and sad thing, because at the end of it, war is actually a lazy administrator's escape route, because managing relationships with other countries diplomatically is very complex, and the only losers ultimately in a war are the widows and children and parents of those soldiers who will be killed. And I don't know how many of us even recall how many people are killed in Kargil. So I don't know, I'm just confused about all that.
Josy, I read your book cover to cover, and it is mighty depressing. At the same time, it is amazingly revealing. I mean, before even I talk to you, I would ask everyone here to pick up a book from outside and read it. It actually tells us what India really is. Please, ladies and gentlemen, go out and pick up Josy's book. It really shows the underbelly of this, quote, great, unquote, country. I'll come to a few things. One is, I would want you to narrate to us one or two of the major investigations that you have discovered and written about in this book, and how you went about it and what it actually led to. I was also reading just now your excerpt on, from the Adani issue that you talked about. And your book reads, the Adani group allegedly took out over 5,000 crore rupees to tax havens using inflated bills for the import of power equipment from South Korea and China. The SIT on black money was told by the DRI and the Enforcement Directorate. According to a senior ED official associated with the SIT, if the Adani case reached its logical conclusion, the group will have to pay a fine of around 15,000 crores. And probably go to jail as well. If a watertight, it is a watertight case, he said, about the trail of documents showing how the group diverted 5,468 crores to Mauritius via Dubai. The Adani group vehemently denies any wrongdoing. Modi, after his rhetoric-filled right to power, has been silent. Would you like to tell us more about this case also?
Thank you. Investigative journalism is very interesting to read when the final book or the final article is very interesting and very revealing. But what goes behind it is usually very lazy, not lazy, very laborious and long-winding documentation process. So, for example, long ago, years ago, I came across one document which emerged in public, which was a letter written by a joint director of the Intelligence Bureau to a joint secretary in the Home Ministry after Kandahar hijack of 1999, saying that Jet Airways promoter Naresh Goyal has links to Dawood Ibrahim. I was curious, and there was Parliament was in uproar for days, and Advani said we will take action. Nothing happened. So years later, I said, why nothing happened and how far and how deep is this? And I kept looking for, when I started doing the book, I thought that I wanted to tell the story of Indian aviation. So there's a segment in the book about Indian aviation which starts with, J.R.D. Tata, a rich, probably little maverick man, becoming South Asia's first commercial pilot license holder, and personally flying in the first aircraft into the region. And by the 90s, when liberalization happened and privatization opened up, how Ratan Tata was frustrated and couldn't start his airlines. But two men came in and started their airlines. One was a Malayali from Trivandrum called Taqiyuddin Wahid. He started East West Airlines. Those old enough to recall, they really glamorized flying in this country. The second one was Naresh Goyal. In 1995, Taqiyuddin Wahid was killed by police at Chota Rajan's gang because Taqiyuddin was close to Dawood Ibrahim. The East West folded up in 1997. So when I started the book, I went around talking to people. I went and met a very important official who handled the Naresh Goyal links to underworld in Intelligence Bureau. IPS officer, retired IPS officer of quite a reputation. He actually requested me not to tell anyone where he lives. He was so afraid, years after retirement. That's the reality of this country. But I didn't give up. I kept going around meeting people. And one day somebody in the Home Ministry handed over a file to me of Jet Airways. And there is a full chapter on Naresh Goyal and his links to underworld and Hawala routes and transactions. And sometimes stories come like that. Sometimes, I was talking to a bureaucrat in Punjab one day, long ago. He told me that, the Governor S.F. Rodrigues, former Army Chief General S.F. Rodrigues, who was then Punjab Governor, he has favored this Alpha G core group in Amritsar. He's going out of the way. They've been allowed to build apartment, hotel, Hyatt Hotel and a big shopping mall. He said there is something. So I started doing data mining on General Rodrigues. I used MCA 21, which many of you are familiar because that's where all the private company documents are deposited. And I came across this company which was owned by the Rodrigues family, which had a small piece of land with a pond in it in Goa, and it is valued at 19 lakh rupees. And in 2005-06, one fine morning, in the papers of the filing, the value of the book value of this entire land and pond is recorded as something like 10 crores, 9.8 crore rupees. And as I further went down, a few months later, this company has been taken over by another company. And that other company has paid them whatever 10 crores, and then they paid something like 3-4 crore rupees to Mark Rodrigues, General Rodrigues' son, to dredge the pond. And that company is again taken over by somebody else. And finally, the ultimate beneficiary of the companies turns out to be Sudhir Chowdhury, the one-eyed arms dealer I spoke about, and his children. And who is the managing director of the company, which is ultimately controlled by Sudhir Chowdhury? It's Colonel Pickle Sodhi, who is Arjuna Award winner, former Miss India Nafis Ali's husband. So stories come from various ways. There are whistleblowers who come and give you, sometimes you spend months tracking documentation and tracking money trails. You wanted me to Adani Group. Yeah, I think, so I have access to this 240 pages of the DRI report. It's very simple case. Adani Group showed bills which said that they have to pay something like 8,500 crore rupees for power equipment they're importing. And you know, mind you, when these companies, whether it's the Ambanis or the Adanis, all these chaps do not pay their money. These are all bank finance money. So most of the money is coming from public sector banks, our banks, you know. And the bill is raised from a Dubai company. The equipments are coming from South Korea and China. But it turned out that the Dubai company is a paper company which only paid 3,000 some crore rupees to the companies in South Korea and China. The rest of the 5,000 plus crores is actually gone to a company in Mauritius, which is controlled by Gautam Adani's brother, Vinod Adani. It's a very simple case. And under FEMA, if I'm not wrong, the fine is 3 times. And under PMLA, you know, criminal case can be initiated. Everything is involved in it. But I think if you look at CBI, you know, when you go out of Delhi, a lot of states, you know, people talk about bring CBI in, everything will be solved. No, actually CBI is actually as bad, as corrupt or as biased as anything else. You see the suicide of Bansal, the Director General of Ministry of Corporate Affairs last week. He says that the DIG, who is a mid-rank officer, says that I will do anything to you because I'm Amit Shah's man. And you know how many mainstream newspapers reported that he used Amit Shah's BJP president's name to bully this man into suicide. I'm not holding this thing for Bansal. The CBI's real conviction rate is less than 3%. Look back at the stories. How many times have you read about CBI filing cases against Reliance Group? From the Padal Ganga's days onwards, the murder cases and all that. How many Reliance employees and owners have been really brought to jail and trial? Friends, I think we are being fooled, royally fooled on a daily basis by the rhetoric of politicians and these organizations, which are supposed to uphold the law. They do not uphold the law. They are mere lapdogs of the masses of the day. And to a great extent, the mainstream media is also becoming one.
My question is a follow-up of Ajay's question. From what I heard from you, corruption in businessmen is much, much larger than corruption between politicians. And I think so too. I think businessmen are more corrupt than politicians. And if businessmen become politicians, it becomes worse. And I think that is the problem. I want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, first question is, I don't think any businessman actually wants to be corrupt, but because he is ambitious to build bigger houses, he has only option is to be corrupt, right? So I don't think if you have to go and interview Mukesh Ambani or Anil Ambani and ask him, sir, would you want to do anything bad? They will say, no, 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 we want to be clean, right? All of us want to be clean. I think we have built up a very expensive political system which actually exists in the black market. Let's be honest. All our political parties exist in the black market. And these black political parties suck up thousands of crores every year. You know, I was in Bihar before the last state assembly election. BJP was paying salaries up to the level of the block leaders. And these are salaries, significantly good salaries. Please look at the BJP's filings. How much of it is declared there? I know of a Congress leader who actually carried cash in crores in bag to Kerala to ensure the victory of one of our very sophisticated MPs. I don't want to name him because I've had enough trouble with him already. Now, the fact is that we have let our politics be so corrupt and so expensive that the corporates realize that pleasing the corrupt politicians is actually good for business, right? Because instead of going to the competitive route, once he comes to power, I just need to twist him, you know. I mean, SBI has offered a $1 billion loan to Adani in Australia, am I right? So, that's the story. So, I don't know, I mean, I'm not trying to, but I think corporates have realized that in this country, it is far better to be corrupt than to be honest. And politicians have realized that corporates will give it. So there are chartered aircrafts flying in from cities like Hyderabad and Lucknow, filled with bags of cash into Delhi. I'm not boasting. I'm not bullshit. And this has been confessed to me by one of your very famous leaders in the city. He said that, I asked him, I said, you have made your money, why are you so fighting like this? He said, you don't know how much money I have sent to Delhi. So there's a parallel world that exists out there. Before the last Lok Sabha election, the intelligence reports from Ahmedabad and Surat said that up to 100 crore rupees was going through Hawala routes out of these two cities. 100 crores a day. In a state like Andhra and Telangana today, do you know that an average MB has to spend over 50 crore rupees to fight an election? 60. 60. In a small state like Kerala, it's 10 crores. So I don't know who are we fooling. Are we fooling ourselves, or are we just, I don't know. I mean, I'm really confused about that.
Yeah, Josy,
last one.
yeah, this is Sanjay. Yeah, my question is actually, I'm trying to be an optimist here, being inspired by Bill Gates' site called impatientoptimist.org. Okay, so both from you and Akar, I think we heard stark reality. Like you said, you know, we are sort of in a vulture world. My question is, in a country of 1 billion population, where we have more than 300 million middle class, 1,500 of whom are sitting here in the audience today and intently listening to you, don't you think there should be hope? There should be forums like WikiLeaks and several other forums. The power of social media is clear. There was Miss Ashraf who got 5 million hits on a rap video, which is obvious that there is an appetite. There are people listening, and hopefully a lot of that listening will convert to action. So what's your comment on that? Can there not be many more forums like WikiLeaks which can actually overcome the so-called gags and the corruption and the all-pervasive sort of, you know, murder which is happening? Your comment, please.
Sorry if I came across as a pessimist. No, I'm an extreme optimist. In fact, my book winds up an extreme optimism. I say that in the long term, Indian democracy is maturing because I talk about the Tihar jail. Tihar jail, until about 20 years ago, only had anonymous poor, probably Dalit Muslim thieves and murderers and whatever, you know, people accused of crime. But today you have chief ministers and IPS officers and other high profiles who visit Tihar and spend much time there. So in the long term, there is hope. But in the long term, we are all going to be dead. So my book is about here and now. And social media, mind you, Sanjay, is a twin-edged weapon. Ask people like me. When I did stories against the UPA government, and I think that I can without much saying, I can take some credit for bringing out some of the biggest scandals of UPA government. Nobody ever turned around to me on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, social media forums, and said that you are a BJP man, you are a communist, or you are a Christian. Today when I write a word, in the morning there is this barrage, unleashed by mostly paid trolls and Twitters, abusing me in the worst case scenario. And many of them who don't know that I'm a man, they even threaten sexual abuse, violence, right? No, and where does the liberal value holding middle class go? The only middle class that calls me up are people like my mother and my wife who are worried about my health, you know, my security. So I'm saying that there is a larger silence than action. In economies that are growing, economies that are built on entrepreneurship, economies that are not built on natural resources like Saudi Arabia. So we are not a Saudi Arabia. Our major part of our GDP do not come from natural resources. So we do not suffer from the curse of natural resources. When entrepreneurship grows, the entrepreneurs usually stand up and challenge the state for change. And I sense a change. I was in Bangalore 2 weeks ago. Some of India's very powerful startup CEOs reached out. In fact, one of them was coming back from the US. He called me saying that, I'm reaching in the morning. Can you please wait? I want to meet you. And he spent an hour and a half. A man who is worth billions of dollars. They are also worried. They're worried because they realize that all the dream that they built up, the Olas and Flipkarts of the world, could be one day squeezed out of their life by the vultures that are out there in Delhi and Mumbai and other cities. So there is frustration and anger. But I think that the inflection point has not reached. We are still being misled, intimidated and bullied by majoritarian propaganda. And when I say majoritarian, it is not just about religious majoritarianism, but I think it's more about the power of politics and power of money. Money not only buys your words, it can also buy your silence. And I think we are in that stage. That's why in the evenings we sit and watch people like Arnab Goswami fooling us repeatedly day after day.